I came back to Savannah after 20 years. I didn't announce it. I didn't call ahead. Some part of me wanted the truth before the welcome. The house was exactly where I had left it, white columns, wide porch iron railings, still warm from the afternoon sun. Too perfect. Too calm. The kind of calm that makes your stomach tighten before your mind catches up. I remember thinking, good, they've taken care of it. That thought lasted exactly 3 seconds. The front door was open. Music drifted out, low laughter glasses touching the careless sound of people who believe the world is solid beneath their feet. I stepped inside quietly, carrying only a small bag, my boots soft against the wood. And then I saw her. At first my mind refused to name what my eyes were seeing. A shape, on the floor, by the door, not placed there carefully, not resting, just folded, curled into herself like something trying to disappear. I thought it was a pile of coats. Or a rug thrown aside. Then the shape breathed. My heart slowed instead of racing. That should have been my first warning. Shock doesn't scream, it goes cold. She was sleeping on the doormat. Not metaphorically, not briefly, my sister, Rose. Her body was thin in a way that spoke of time, not illness. The kind of thin that comes from shrinking yourself day after day, learning how to take up less space. Her hair, once carefully pinned every morning, had fallen loose and gray across her face. One arm was tucked under her chest, as if she were used to hard floors. Used to this, I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for someone to notice her, waiting for someone to react. No one did. The party continued around her like she wasn't real. Then a familiar voice cut through the room. "Careful, you'll scuff the floor." I looked up. My son, Samuel. He was laughing, holding a glass in one hand already, mid-conversation with people I didn't recognize. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at her. He stepped forward and wiped the mud from his boots on her back, slowly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rose didn't move, didn't flinch. That hurt more than the act itself. Before I could breathe, before the sound reached my throat, Samuel laughed again and waved his hand vaguely toward the floor. "She's harmless," he said to his guests. "Our little maid has issues." The word maid landed softly, like a joke, like permission. A few people laughed, not loudly, politely, the kind of laughter people use when they don't want to stand out. Someone said, "Oh." Someone else looked away. No one screamed. No one asked her name. The room didn't explode. It froze. I could hear my own breathing, then shallow, careful, as if the air itself might break if I used too much of it. My heart didn't pound. It retreated, pulled back into a smaller, tighter place. I was still standing near the door. No one noticed me yet. I remember thinking how strange it was that after surviving avalanches, mine collapses, and 20 winters farther north than any woman I knew had chosen to live, this was the moment my legs threatened to give out. Not fear. Recognition. Something inside me began to close. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a door you didn't know was open until it shuts. The mother in me, the woman who wrote letters that never came back, who sent money every month without fail, who counted years by birthdays missed, she stepped back. I felt her leave. I felt the absence settle in her place. I had believed absence could be survived, that love could stretch, that loyalty waited patiently for return. Standing there watching my sister sleep on the floor of the house I paid for under the boots of the son I raised, I understood how naive that belief had been. I stepped forward. The sound of my boots against the floor was small, but it carried. Conversations thinned. Someone noticed me out of the corner of their eye. Then someone else. The silence spread the way cold spread slowly, then all at once. Samuel turned. For a fraction of a second, I saw it. Not recognition. Calculation. His smile didn't fall. It adjusted. "Mama," he said too brightly. "You're early." I looked at him. Really looked. The familiar face was there, the shape of his jaw, the eyes he used to avoid when he lied as a boy, but something essential was missing. Something unguarded. I glanced back at Rose. She was still asleep. That too told me something. If she had been pretending, she would have woken. I met Samuel's eyes again. "Why is she on the floor?" I asked. My voice surprised me. It was steady, flat, not loud enough to accuse, not soft enough to excuse. A few heads turned. Samuel chuckled as if indulging me. "She gets confused," he said. "Sometimes she insists on sleeping there. Says it's safer, safer." The word rang strangely in the air. I felt the room watching now, curious, polite, expectant, waiting for me to either accept the explanation or embarrass myself by pushing. I waited, just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. "She's my sister," I said. Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And I'm taking care of her," he replied. "You've been gone a long time." There it was, not accusation, not gratitude, ownership. I nodded slowly. 20 years. Yes. Long enough for stories to grow without witnesses. Long enough for someone to rewrite the truth and call it mercy. I took one more step forward and knelt beside Rose. Up close, I could see the small details, the way her hands were folded too neatly, the faint smell of detergent instead of perfume, the bruising on her wrist, old and yellowed, carefully hidden by sleeves that were no longer there. I touched her shoulder. She stirred slightly, mumbled something I couldn't catch. I didn't try to wake her. Instead, I looked up at my son. "Get your guests a drink," I said quietly. The room stilled again. It wasn't a request. Samuel stared at me, something dark flickering behind his eyes. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Then he smiled. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Mama's tired. Long trip." He gestured toward the hall. "Let's give her space." People obeyed without realizing they were doing it. They always do. As the room cleared, I stayed kneeling on the floor, my hand still resting on my sister's shoulder. I didn't know yet what I would do. I only knew one thing with certainty. Whatever had happened in this house during my absence, it had not happened by accident. And I was no longer the woman who could afford to look away. They said I was dead. Not officially. Not with flowers or a headstone. Just gone. Gone in the way people become when it is easier not to deal with them anymore. I learned that later. At first, I only felt it a strange displacement, as if I were standing slightly to the side of myself, watching a version of my life continue without me. Samuel made the introduction. He stood close to me, one hand lightly resting on my elbow, the gesture careful, almost affectionate. For anyone watching, it would have looked like a devoted son supporting his aging mother, his fingers pressed harder than necessary. "Mama doesn't remember things anymore," he said gently, addressing the man standing near the fireplace. "Age does that." The man nodded slowly. "Judge Henry Collins." I recognized him immediately. The years had thickened his waist and softened his face, but not enough to erase memory. I had sat across from him decades ago when he was still proving himself, when my signature and my word had mattered. Now he looked at me as one looks at an old photograph whose origin they can't quite place. I met his eyes, held them. He hesitated. Just for a second. In that second, I felt something almost like hope. Samuel continued speaking smoothly, effortlessly. "She gets confused about where she is," he said. "Sometimes she thinks it's years ago. Sometimes she doesn't recognize people. It's heartbreaking, heartbreaking." The word was chosen carefully, not too dramatic, just enough to invite sympathy. Judge Collins shifted his weight, His gaze flicked from Samuel to me, then to the floor. He nodded. Once. That was all it took. I watched the lie land, watched it settle comfortably in the room like furniture no one wanted to move because it fit well enough. No one asked me a question. No one asked for clarification. I was still standing there, breathing, listening, understanding every word, and yet I had ceased to be a reliable source of my own reality. That was when I understood something that would stay with me long after that night. Truth doesn't lose to lies. It loses to convenience. Samuel squeezed my elbow lightly. "Come on, Mama," he said with a patient smile. "You must be exhausted. Let's get you upstairs." The words were kind. The tone was not. I glanced back once. Rose was still on the floor. Someone had placed a thin throw over her now, as if that solved something, as if covering the evidence erased the crime. I wanted to kneel again, to touch her, to say her name, but I didn't. Because suddenly instinct was louder than emotion, and instinct said, "Observe." We walked toward the stairs. I could feel the eyes on us, curious, relieved, already drifting back to their drinks. Whatever tension had briefly existed was dissolving. Drama avoided. Order restored. The staircase creaked softly beneath our feet. Halfway up, Samuel leaned closer. "You're doing great," he murmured, for my ears alone. "Just keep walking." The audience could still see us. I nodded once, playing my part. At the top of the stairs, the hallway opened into shadow and quiet. The sounds of the party dulled as if muffled by distance and willful ignorance. Samuel's hand tightened. The door to the bedroom closed behind us. The click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. The smile slid from his face, not dramatically. It simply disappeared as if it had never been real. He stepped back, looked at me differently now. Not as his mother, as a problem. "You shouldn't have come back like this," he said. His voice was low, controlled. "No anger yet. That would come later." I studied him. The way his shoulders squared, the way he positioned himself between me and the door. Small details. "Defensive details. I came home," I replied. He scoffed softly. "This isn't your home anymore." The sentence landed cleanly. "Practiced. You left," he continued. "For 20 years. You sent money. That's not the same as being here." I nodded. "I know." Something flickered across his face, then annoyance, maybe disappointment. He had expected denial, anger, tears. I gave him none of it. "You don't remember what things are like here," he said. "You don't understand how fragile Rose is. How complicated everything's become. Complicated. Another careful word." I looked around the room. My room. The furniture had changed. The bedspread wasn't mine. The dresser drawers felt unfamiliar beneath my fingers. The space smelled faintly of something floral, artificial. Occupied. "Where is she sleeping?" I asked. Samuel hesitated. "Rose," he said. "Where she's comfortable." I met his gaze again. Silence stretched. "I saw her on the floor," I said. His jaw tightened. "She chooses that," he replied quickly. "She feels safer close to the door. Doctors say routine matters." Doctors. Plural. Strategic. I nodded slowly. "I'd like to speak to one," I said. The tension sharpened. "That's not necessary," he replied. "They agree with me." "With what?" "With the fact that you're not entirely yourself anymore." There it was, not said directly. "Not yet." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You need to understand something," he said. "People downstairs think you passed away years ago, or that you're not present." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Which is it?" I asked. He smiled thinly. Does it matter? It did, but not in the way he thought. So I said carefully, "I'm dead," or confused. Either way, inconvenient. He exhaled, almost a laugh. "You always were smart," he said. Even now. A compliment shaped like a dismissal. "You're already gone," he whispered. "Let's keep it that way." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They slid into the room and settled their heavy final. I studied his face in that moment, looked for something familiar. The boy who cried when I scraped my knee. The teenager who begged me not to leave. The man I had imagined raising children of his own. I found none of them. Only someone who had learned how to survive by rewriting the past. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The question was simple. His answer was not. "For tonight," he said, "I want you to rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about arrangements, care, management, what's best for everyone. Everyone." I nodded. "Of course," I said softly. Relief crossed his face. He believed me. That was his mistake. He turned toward a narrow door at the end of the hallway. "This way," he said. I followed. The space beyond was smaller than a bedroom. Much smaller. A storage room. No windows. A narrow cot pushed against the wall. Boxes stacked carelessly. The air stale. He opened the door. Gestured inside. "This will do for now," he said. "Just until things settle." Things. Always things. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "If you cause trouble," he said, "if you try to talk to anyone downstairs, Rose goes outside." I didn't react. "Nightgown," he added quietly. "It gets cold here." That was the moment the last remaining doubt dissolved. Not anger, not disbelief. Certainty. He wasn't improvising. This was planned. I stepped into the room. The door closed behind me. Locked. I stood there in the darkness, listening to his footsteps, retreat to the faint music below, to my own breathing. I wasn't afraid. Fear clouds thinking. What I felt instead was something colder, something clearer. I was no longer dealing with misunderstanding or neglect. I was dealing with intent, and intent once recognized could be prepared for. I sat on the cot back, straight eyes open, listening, waiting. Because now I understood the rules of the game, and I had no intention of disappearing quietly. They didn't need chains. That was the first thing I understood. Chains leave marks. Bruises invite questions. Noise attracts attention. They used something quieter. Pills. I noticed it the morning after I was locked in the storage room. The door opened without ceremony. No apology. No explanation. A young woman I hadn't seen before set a tray down just inside the doorway and left without meeting my eyes. Tea. Toast. A small white dish with tablets arranged neatly like something from a hospital brochure. I didn't touch them. I waited. When the house stirred, when footsteps moved past the door, when the sounds of ordinary life resumed, I stepped into the hallway. Rose was in the kitchen. She sat at the table, hands folded in her lap posture, too careful. Someone had brushed her hair. Someone had changed her clothes. A clean cardigan hung loosely on her shoulders, the sleeves slightly too long, as if chosen for someone else. Her hands shook, not violently, not enough to draw concern. Just enough to be noticed by someone who remembered how steady they used to be. I called her name. Rose. She looked up slowly, as if lifting her gaze required effort. When our eyes met, something passed between us. Recognition, relief, and then apology. She smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was the kind people learn when they are expected to reassure others that everything is fine. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "I forgot what I was saying." "You weren't saying anything," I replied. She blinked, confused. "Oh," she said. "Then I suppose that's good." Her voice trailed off mid-sentence, as if the thought had simply slipped away. She reached for her tea with both hands, careful not to spill. I watched her fingers. The tremor worsened when she lifted the cup. "Have you eaten?" I asked. She nodded immediately. "Yes," she said, too quickly. I always eat. Another learned answer. The doctor arrived mid-morning. Dr. Nathan Hale. He was polite in the way men are polite when they expect obedience. His voice was low, soothing, practiced. He spoke slowly as if addressing someone fragile, not just Rose, but me as well. She's declining, he said softly after a brief examination that involved very little examination at all. Age affects everyone differently. Some people fade. Fade. A word without edges. He explained the regimen with professional calm. Vitamin injections, daily tea, a mild sedative to help with anxiety. All very standard, he assured me. Nothing to worry about. I nodded. I asked simple questions. How long had she been taking them? Who prescribed the dosage? What side effects should we expect? He answered without hesitation. Too smoothly. I noticed something then, not in his words, but in Rose. As he spoke, she nodded along. Agreed. Smiled when he smiled. When he finished, he reached into his bag and handed her a small paper cup. She took it without question. Didn't ask what it was. Didn't hesitate. Swallowed. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic. Pattern recognition. I had seen this before, not in people but in systems. In the North, when a machine begins to fail, it doesn't break all at once. It misfires subtly, responds slower, loses precision, and if you're not paying attention, you blame age, weather, wear, until it stops completely. After the doctor left, Rose grew quieter. Her movements slowed, her eyes lost focus. When I spoke to her, she listened carefully, too carefully, as if concentrating on holding the moment together. By afternoon, she was dozing in her chair. Someone placed a blanket over her shoulders. Someone always did. I was returned to the storage room before dinner, this time without explanation. The lock clicked shut. I sat on the cot and waited. That night, I didn't sleep. Sleep is an act of trust. I listened. Music drifted up from below, the low hum of voices, the soft rhythm of a piano playlist chosen to sound tasteful, unintrusive. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed a little too loudly. Another voice followed, then another. Wine was poured. I could hear the liquid glug gently followed by murmurs of approval. Paid for with my blood and my trust. I counted breaths. I counted seconds. I replayed the day in my mind slowly, carefully. The timing. Rose took pills in the morning. By midday, her hands shook. By afternoon, her words slipped. By evening, she was compliant, quiet, exhausted. By night, she slept deeply, unnaturally. It wasn't random. It was scheduled. I pressed my palm against the wall. Cold, solid. I remembered how Rose used to argue with me about everything, how she questioned instructions, corrected details, insisted on understanding before agreeing. The woman downstairs was not that person. Not because she had changed, because she was being altered. The next morning confirmed it. Rose was brought to the table again. Tea was poured. The pills appeared. This time I watched more closely. When she hesitated just a fraction, a woman I assumed was a nurse touched her arm gently. "Come on, dear," she said. "You know this helps." Rose obeyed, not because she wanted to, because she had learned that resistance was tiring. I felt anger then, not explosive, contained, useful. I didn't speak. I observed. I noticed how the dosage never changed, not when Rose seemed worse, not when she seemed better. I noticed how the doctor never asked how she felt, only how she behaved. I noticed how everyone referred to her as fragile, but never as frightened. I noticed how the house itself seemed to accommodate this narrative. Soft voices, slow movements, lowered expectations. It made everything easier. For them. By the third night, I was certain. This wasn't madness. It was chemistry. Carefully calibrated, administered with routine, defended by language, declining, fading, fragile, words that absolved responsibility. I lay on the cot, staring into the darkness, listening to the sounds below, the life of the house continuing without us. Laughter rose and fell. A toast was made. Someone applauded. I felt something else settle inside me then. Not despair. Resolve. I had spent years in places where mistakes killed people, where assumptions were fatal, where you learned to trust evidence over reassurance. And everything I had seen pointed to one conclusion: Rose was not losing her mind. It was being taken from her, deliberately, slowly, cleanly. I didn't know yet how deep it went. I didn't know who all was involved, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I slept, if I accepted the story, if I allowed myself to become what they said I was, we would disappear, quietly, and no one would ask why. So I stayed awake. I listened. I counted. And in the darkness of that small room, with music floating up through the floorboards and my sister fading by design, I made a decision. I would not confront them yet, not without understanding the full mechanism. Because when you challenge a system too early, it doesn't break. It adapts. And I needed it exposed. Rose began to speak differently on the fourth day. Not clearly, not continuously, in fragments. At first I thought it was the medication wearing off unevenly, moments of lucidity surfacing between waves of fog. She would hum softly while staring at the window. Say half a sentence, then stop. Smile at nothing. Children's phrases. Old rhymes we hadn't spoken aloud since we were girls. The little engine, she murmured, once eyes fixed on the table. I think I can. My throat tightened. That had been ours. A secret joke whispered under blankets when we were supposed to be asleep. A way of telling each other I'm hiding something without being overheard. I didn't react. I waited. Later that afternoon, she sat beside me on the couch, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. Her body felt fragile, lighter than I remembered. She breathed slowly, evenly, as if concentrating on each breath. I could feel her gathering something inside herself. Then suddenly her fingers tightened around my wrist. Not weak, urgent. Second shelf, she whispered. I leaned closer. Rose, her lips barely moved. Green book, she said. Page 500. Her eyes met mine. For the first time since I'd arrived, they were sharp, present, clear, and then it vanished. She blinked. Her grip loosened. She slumped slightly against me, confused again, apologetic. I'm sorry, she said. Did I fall asleep? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was pounding now, not with fear, but with recognition. She had left something for me, and she had done it knowing what it would cost her to remember. The library was on the ground floor, past the sitting room, down a narrow corridor Samuel rarely used. I hadn't been allowed near it since my return. The door was locked. Of course it was. That evening, while Rose slept deeply unnaturally, I sat alone in the storage room and planned. Planning calmed me. It always had. I counted the hours between checks, the pattern of footsteps, the moments when the house grew quiet, not because people were asleep, but because they were distracted. The lock on the library door was old, the kind that relied more on intimidation than engineering. I had learned long ago that most barriers are symbolic. They exist to discourage the obedient. I waited until the house exhaled, until laughter died down, until the last glass was set aside, until the music ended not with a song but with silence. Then I moved. The door gave way quietly. Inside, the library smelled of dust and leather and time. The lights were off. I didn't turn them on. I didn't need to. I moved by memory. Second shelf from the bottom. My fingers brushed spines. Leather. Cloth. Paper. Then green. The book was heavier than it should have been. I pulled it free. The title meant nothing. A thick volume. Unremarkable. Until I opened it. The pages had been cut away, hollowed carefully, deliberately. Inside, nestled where words should have been, was a notebook. Plain, worn. I sat on the floor. I didn't open it immediately. Some part of me knew that once I did, there would be no return to uncertainty. Suspicion still allowed for hope. Proof did not. Finally, I turned the first page. Dates, written neatly at first, March 12, April 3, June 18, Rose's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in years. The early entries were careful, precise, the handwriting of a woman still trying to stay ahead of chaos. Samuel sold the silver today. Said it was an accident. I found the receipt. I tried to write Eleanor. He took the letter. Said she's busy. My name. Written in ink. I closed my eyes. I turned the page. The handwriting began to change. Still legible. Less confident. Doctor? Hale came again. New injections. He says they're vitamins. I slept for 2 days. The Winslow painting is gone. Samuel says I agreed to sell it. I don't remember agreeing. Another page. Another. Each entry tightened something inside me. The dates moved closer together. The words grew uneven. Samuel says Eleanor is dead. I don't believe him. I feel her. I pressed my hand to my mouth. Further on, the writing wavered. Pencil now. Not ink. There is no money left. He gambled again. The house is mortgaged. They want to sell the land. A store. They'll tear down the garden. The garden. Our father's apple trees. The bench where Rose and I used to sit in the evenings arguing about nothing. I turned another page. I hid the documents. My breath caught. He won't find them. If Eleanor comes back. The sentence ended there. The rest of the page was blank. I closed the notebook slowly. The room felt colder. Not physically, emotionally. This wasn't desperation. It was preparation. Rose hadn't just been surviving. She had been documenting, saving evidence, waiting. For me. I sat there for a long time, the notebook resting in my lap, my back against the shelf. I could hear my own heartbeat now, steady, deliberate. Samuel hadn't needed my care. He hadn't needed my presence. He needed my signature. Everything pointed to it. The sold paintings, the mortgaged land, the vanished money. He had burned through it all. And now he needed something only I could give. Legal authority, ownership, final consent, and if that failed, my silence. The pills made sense now, the doctor, the narrative of decline. If I were declared incompetent, if Rose were reduced to incoherence, the signatures would come easily. Or not at all. Either way, resistance would disappear. I stood slowly. Every step felt deliberate now, weighted with understanding. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't even cruelty born of resentment. It was strategy. I returned the book to its place. Carefully, I locked the library door behind me. Back in the storage room, I sat on the cot and stared at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't feel betrayed in the way people talk about betrayal, sharp, sudden, explosive. This was quieter, deeper. It was the realization that the person you protected had learned how to use that protection against you. That love had been studied, mapped, exploited. I thought of Samuel as a child, the way he used to watch people even then, the way he learned quickly what expressions worked, what tone softened resistance. I had mistaken intelligence for empathy. I lay back on the cot and closed my eyes, not to sleep, to think. I now had knowledge, but knowledge alone doesn't stop a machine. It only tells you where to place the lever. I didn't know yet how I would use what Rose had left me. I only knew that I would. Because silence, once chosen consciously, is no longer silence. It is surrender. And I had not crossed half a continent, not survived half a lifetime, to disappear into someone else's convenience. Outside the room, the house breathed on. Lights dimmed, doors closed, locks clicked. They believed the story they had written. They believed I was tired, confused, manageable. They believed Rose was fading. They were wrong. And now, for the first time since my return, I allowed myself a thin, controlled smile, because I finally understood the shape of the trap, and traps can be reversed. I heard them behind the curtain. Not by accident. I wasn't supposed to be there, but by then I had learned how the house breathed when it exhaled, when it became careless. Samuel believed control was permanent. He underestimated the value of patience. The library door was ajar. The curtain by the tall window barely moved. I stood in the narrow space behind it, close enough to smell dust and old fabric, far enough to remain unseen. Their voices carried clearly. Low. Contained. Unemotional. Double the dose, Samuel said. No hesitation. No uncertainty. They need to be vegetables by morning. The words landed inside me without explosion. Vegetables. Not people, not family. Something to be rendered inert. I felt my breathing slow, the way it did when a situation crossed from dangerous into fatal. Fear sharpens, but clarity is colder. Dr. Hale spoke next. Quietly. There's a limit, he said. Her heart. Samuel cut him off. If they die, he said calmly, almost kindly, the land is still mine. Silence followed. Not shock. Calculation. I leaned my forehead gently against the wall. There it was. Not implication. Not suspicion. Intent. Clear-spoken, irreversible. I thought I would feel something dramatic in that moment. Rage, grief, disbelief. Instead, I felt something settle. Final. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't desperation. This was willingness. A willingness to erase 2 lives in exchange for property. The doctor exhaled. Audibly. I'll need to adjust the timing, he said. Samuel's response was immediate. Tonight. A pause. Make sure they sleep. Footsteps moved closer. I stepped back silently, my body already calculating exits, shadows, angles. The curtain shifted. The door closed. I stayed where I was long after they left. I needed to feel the truth fully before I moved. Because once you act, you don't get to misunderstand anymore. Back in the storage room, I sat on the cot and stared at my hands. They were steady. That told me everything. Fear hadn't taken me, which meant I could think. I thought about Rose, about the way she apologized when she forgot words, as if her existence were an inconvenience she needed to compensate for. I thought about the tea, the pills, the careful language. I thought about Samuel as a child standing beside me while I reviewed contracts, watching how power worked, how signatures mattered, how silence could be arranged. He had learned too well. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Samuel thrived on control, on dominance, on the assumption that people responded emotionally with pleading anger tears. I would give him none of that. Instead, I went after the weak joint in the structure. Dr. Hale. Men like him don't start cruel. They start compromised. I waited until evening, until the house dimmed, until the staff retreated into routines, until Rose was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. I found Dr. Hale near the back corridor, his black medical bag hanging from his shoulder like a burden. He almost dropped it when he saw me. You shouldn't be up, he said quickly. You need rest. I stepped closer, close enough that he had to look at me. Doctor, I said quietly, how many patients have you lost? His eyes flickered. I don't, accidentally, I added. That stopped him. The corridor was narrow, no witnesses. Just the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the faint ticking of a clock somewhere deeper in the house. You had one, I continued. A woman, late 60s. Cardiac event. Very sudden. He swallowed. She left her condo to your wife, I said calmly. An odd coincidence, his face drained of color. I don't know what you think you falsified her medication records, I said, adjusted dosages after the fact. You called it natural progression. His hand tightened around the strap of his bag. I could be mistaken, I added gently. Unless you confirm it. He didn't speak. His breathing quickened. I leaned slightly closer, lowering my voice. You're not a killer, I said. You're just a man who didn't say no when he should have. The silence stretched. I heard you in the library, I said. That did it. He looked away, then back at me. You don't understand, he whispered. Samuel, Samuel, I repeated, tasting the name. Threatened you, a nod. Leverage, I said. Always leverage. I straightened. You have two choices, I said. Carry out his order tonight, or live the rest of your life waiting for someone like me to speak. He closed his eyes. I'll lose everything, he murmured. You already have, I replied. You just haven't accepted it yet. I let the words settle. Then I gave him something else. Fear needs structure. I know people, I said, in places that review licenses, quietly, thoroughly. That was partially true. But truth, like silence, is effective when shaped carefully. I also know how long these reviews take, I continued, and how much they uncover. He looked at me now as if truly seeing me for the first time. Not as a confused old woman, as a threat. What do you want? He asked. I didn't hesitate. You will switch the pills, I said. Tonight. His brow furrowed. For what? Anything harmless, I replied. Vitamins, placebos, chalk if you must. And Samuel, you will tell him the dosage has been increased, I said. You will tell him they'll be unresponsive by morning. He hesitated. What if he checks? He won't, I said. He trusts outcomes, not methods. Another silence. This one heavier. Tomorrow, I added when anyone asks about our condition, you will say nothing. No diagnosis. No speculation. He nodded slowly. His shoulders sagged. I never wanted this, he said. No one ever does, I replied. Until they do. I stepped back. You should go, I said, before someone notices. He adjusted his grip on the bag. At the door he paused. If he finds out, he won't, I said. Not yet. I stood alone in the corridor, listening to his footsteps fade. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the dull weight of inevitability. I returned to the storage room and sat down. For the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to rest my head against the wall. Rose would wake tomorrow clearer than she had in weeks. Samuel would believe his plan was working. That illusion was necessary. Because the most dangerous moment in any conflict is when the person who believes they are winning begins to rush. And Samuel was already rushing. That night, I didn't listen to the music. I listened to the quiet, to the house holding its breath, because intent had been spoken aloud. And once intent is spoken, it leaves a trace, a mark, a weakness. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was focused, and focus, unlike fear, does not tremble. Rose told me just before dawn, not in a sentence, not even in words at first. She touched my sleeve while I sat beside her bed, listening to her breathe evenly now, naturally, like someone waking from a long chemical sleep. Her eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks, though still fragile around the edges. She looked at me the way she used to when we were girls and needed to share a secret without being overheard. Then she whispered, barely audible, "The coat." I leaned closer. "My winter coat," she said, "the brown one, with the torn lining." My mind moved faster than my body. The coat, the one I'd worn north decades ago, the one I'd never brought back because it carried too much cold in its seams. The one Samuel had locked me beside in the storage room like an afterthought. I stared at her. She swallowed, gathering strength. "I hid it there," she said. "He never touches old things." "Of course." Samuel was obsessed with surfaces, newness, appearances, momentum. He despised anything that carried memory without profit. Irony has a taste. Bitter, metallic, familiar. I waited until she slept again before I moved. The storage room was silent. Dust motes floated in the thin strip of morning light, leaking under the door. My coat still hung where I'd left it misshapen, forgotten its presence, reduced to background clutter. I ran my fingers along the lining. There. A seam that didn't belong. Rose had sewn it clumsily, her hand unsteady but determined. I worked the thread loose, slowly, carefully. My breath measured my movements quiet. The paper inside was thick, official. I unfolded it only enough to see the seal. The date. My name. The deed. The real one. My knees weakened not from relief, but from the sudden weight of time collapsing inward. 20 years condensed into a single page. Every mile north, every transfer sent, every holiday missed, all of it traced back to this. I sat on the cot and read. Once, then again. The clause stood out immediately. It always had. I remembered insisting on it long ago when the lawyer had suggested removing it for simplicity. Any attempt to cause physical harm, unlawful restraint, or deprivation of care to the donor or their immediate family shall revoke the gift in full. Clear, unambiguous. No room for interpretation. Samuel had never read the fine print. He never thought he'd need to. I folded the document and placed it inside my dress against my skin. Not hidden, anchored. When I stepped back into the hallway, the house was already transforming. Morning staff moved briskly, now voices, bright steps hurried. Flowers arrived in crates. Music equipment was tested and retested. The air shifted, not lighter but louder. A gala. Samuel's gala. He was preparing the house like a stage, each detail rehearsed, each gesture designed to imply stability, legacy, success. As if success could be performed into existence. I watched from the margins. Servants avoided my eyes. Not out of cruelty, out of instruction. Silence had become part of their job description. Samuel passed me in the corridor once, barely glancing my way. "You're up early," he said lightly. "Good." As if my wakefulness were an asset. "As long as you rest later," he added. "Big night." I nodded. Obedience, when chosen, is camouflage. Rose was locked in the attic by mid-morning. Not violently, not angrily, with concern. "It's quieter up there," Samuel said. "Less stimulation." He kissed her forehead, patted her hand. She didn't resist. She didn't need to. I watched her go, my jaw tight, my thoughts controlled. This was not the moment. The attic door closed. The padlock clicked deliberately loud. A performance of authority. Samuel believed the night was over. That the danger had passed, that pills and paperwork had done their work. He walked the house like a man already counting proceeds. I sat alone in the small sitting room and listened. Rehearsed laughter floated in from the dining hall. Glasses were polished. Chairs were aligned precisely. The house hummed with expectation, not joy but certainty. That was his mistake. Certainty dulls perception. I closed my eyes and focused on details. The rhythm of the staff, the timing of Samuel's movements, the way people deferred without thinking. He was used to command, not resistance. I went upstairs once more, slowly, deliberately, carrying myself differently now. Not shuffling, not stooped, grounded. I changed my dress. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, something dark, simple, structured. Clothes aren't costumes, they're signals. I pinned my hair the way I used to when signing contracts, tight enough to hold, loose enough to breathe. Then I waited. Time stretched, the house filled, voices layered over one another, polite and confident. Samuel's voice rose above them all, warm and practiced. I heard my name spoken more than once, gently, vaguely, always in the past tense. "She's not well. It's been hard on him. He's done so much." I stood near the stairs and listened, not with anger, with inventory. This was the audience he'd chosen, people who valued comfort over truth, applause over inquiry. They would not intervene. They would witness. That would be enough. Just before evening, Samuel found me again. He looked immaculate, relaxed, satisfied. "We'll be starting soon," he said. "I assume you'll stay upstairs." I met his eyes. "Of course," I replied. He smiled, relieved. "After tonight," he said casually, "everything will be settled." Settled. A word people use when they mean irreversible. He turned away. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I placed my hand over the folded document beneath my dress. I felt its edge, solid, real. Paper can be heavier than stone when it carries consequence. The music began downstairs. Applause followed. The gala was underway. I took a breath, not to steady myself, to mark the moment, because from this point on there would be no retreat, only revelation. Samuel believed the night was over, that he had already won, that whatever remained upstairs was irrelevant. He was wrong. The night hadn't even begun. Not the polite kind of silence, not the kind people choose. It was the silence that arrives when a lie is exposed too suddenly for anyone to prepare an escape. The music stopped mid-note, like someone had reached inside the sound and crushed it. A glass slipped from a trembling hand and shattered against the floor. No one bent to pick it up. No one moved. Every face turned toward the staircase. Rose stood beside me, not slumped, not confused, not broken. Her arm rested lightly in mine, not for support but for certainty. Her posture was straight, her chin lifted, her eyes, God, her eyes were awake, still fragile, yes, but present, fully present. I felt the room trying to make sense of us, trying to place us back into the story they had already accepted. This was not the version they were told to expect. Samuel stood near the center of the room, halfway through his speech. A glass raised, his smile fixed. Judge Collins stood beside him, holding a folder, the kind that carries authority simply by existing. A pen waited on the table. The future had been scheduled. Samuel saw us. For a fraction of a second, his face forgot itself. It was subtle, but I saw it. A flicker of pure alarm, not fear, not anger, calculation failing. Then the mask returned. Oh, he laughed too quickly, too brightly. They got out. A ripple of uneasy laughter followed, then died, when no one could sustain it. He gestured toward us with practiced warmth. "Poor things," he said. "Confusion does that. You'll have to excuse." I stepped forward. Just one step. The sound of my heel against the marble echoed through the room like punctuation. Samuel stopped speaking. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I reached for the microphone. It felt heavier than I expected. Warm. Used. Samuel's hand twitched as if to stop me. He didn't, because people like Samuel believe control is permanent. I lifted the microphone. "I am Eleanor Whitmore," I said. The sound of my own voice filled the room, steady, unhurried, unmistakably clear, and I am reporting a crime. The words didn't land like an explosion. They settled. Heavy, unavoidable. The silence that followed was different now. Not confusion. Attention. I felt it on my skin like pressure. Samuel laughed again, sharper this time. "This is inappropriate," he said, stepping closer. "She's not well. You can all see that." Dr. Hale," I said calmly without turning my head. "You're here." The doctor stood near one of the columns, half hidden, his black medical bag clutched to his chest like a shield. Every gaze swung toward him. He froze. Judge Collins shifted his weight, his brow furrowing. "Doctor," the judge said. Dr. Hale swallowed. I could see the effort it took him to breathe. "Tell them," I said quietly. Not a command, a release. The doctor looked at Samuel, then at me, then down at the floor. "I falsified the medical records," he said. The words were barely audible at first, but silence carried them farther than shouting ever could. A gasp moved through the room like a wave. I administered sedatives, he continued, voice shaking. Not for treatment, for compliance. Rose's fingers tightened around my arm. Judge Collins took a step forward. Under whose instruction, he asked. The doctor closed his eyes. Samuel Whitmore's. The room broke. Not into chaos, into disbelief. Voices rose overlapping. People turned to one another, whispered, then stopped whispering. Someone said, "This can't be happening." Someone else backed away as if distance could undo hearing. Samuel's smile collapsed. He laughed again, loud, strained. "This is absurd," he said. "You're all listening to a confused old woman and a doctor who's clearly lost his mind." He turned to Judge Collins. "You know me," he said. "You know my family." "This is a misunderstanding." Judge Collins didn't answer. He was looking at me now, really looking, as if measuring not just my words, but the way I stood, the way I held the room without asking permission. "Samuel," I said. He looked at me sharply. "Step back." He didn't. Instead, something in him snapped. The careful calculation evaporated. He lunged, not at the microphone, at me. His movement was fast, unplanned, stripped of performance. His hand came up, fingers spread not to threaten but to end. Rose cried out. I didn't move. I had already accepted this possibility. Judge Collins moved before anyone else could react. He stepped between us, catching Samuel's wrist mid-air. The sound, flesh against flesh, echoed through the room. Enough, the judge said, not loudly, firmly. Samuel struggled. Let go, he hissed. She's lying. Judge Collins tightened his grip. I said enough. Security moved then. Not aggressively. Purposefully. Samuel looked around, disbelief spreading across his face as hands closed around his arms. This was not the script. He twisted, pulling against them. Do you have any idea what she's doing? He shouted. She's destroying everything. I stepped forward again. The microphone was still in my hand. You destroyed it, I said. I'm just naming it. I reached inside my dress and removed the folded document. The sound of paper unfolding was louder than it should have been. This, I said, holding it up, is the original deed. Judge Collins stepped closer, his eyes scanning the page. His face changed. The revocation clause, he murmured. I nodded. Any attempt to harm the donor or her immediate family voids the gift, I said. Immediately. Samuel stared at the paper as if it were something alive. You wouldn't, he whispered. You're my mother. I met his gaze. I was, I said. You made sure of that. The guards tightened their grip. Samuel's strength drained out of him all at once. He sank to his knees. Not dramatically, not begging, empty. Judge Collins closed the folder he'd been holding. The sound was final. Samuel Whitmore, he said, you are under investigation for fraud, unlawful restraint, and attempted harm. He gestured. Take him. As Samuel was led away, his eyes searched the room, not for forgiveness, for witnesses who would deny what they had seen. There were none. The guests stood frozen, unsure whether to leave, apologize, or pretend this had never happened. I didn't look at them. I turned to Rose. She was shaking now, not from fear but release. It's over, I whispered. She nodded, tears sliding freely down her face. Behind us, Judge Collins spoke quietly into his phone. Procedures began. Authority shifted. Not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with a simple, irreversible fact. The truth had been spoken out loud, and once spoken, it could not be put back. I placed the microphone gently on the stand. My hands were steady. For the first time in years, the room was no longer lying. Samuel left in handcuffs. The sound of metal closing around his wrists was quieter than I expected. No dramatic clatter. Just a short final click, the kind that tells you something has passed a point of return. He didn't look at me as they led him away. He looked at the floor, as if the house itself had betrayed him. When the door closed behind the officers, the room didn't erupt. It didn't collapse into noise or relief. People stood still, uncertain what came next, like an audience after the final scene of a play that had gone off script. Then one by one they left, not hurriedly, not defiantly. Ashamed is too strong a word. Uncomfortable is closer. They avoided my eyes. They avoided Rose. The illusion left with them. When the last footsteps faded, the house felt hollow, not empty but paused, like a body between breaths. Judge Collins approached me once more. He spoke quietly, formally, as if lowering his voice might soften what had already been said. "I'm sorry," he said. "It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't meant to be." I nodded. It was enough. The doctor lingered by the wall, pale, small. When our eyes met, he looked down. There would be consequences for him. He knew that. I knew that. But justice is not always the same as destruction. Sometimes it is restraint. When they were gone, Rose and I stood alone in the ballroom. Confetti from the gala still clung to the edges of the floor. A glass lay shattered near the wall, its pieces catching the light in sharp, uneven patterns. The air smelled of perfume and wine and something sour beneath it all, fear perhaps finally dissipating. Rose exhaled, a long, trembling breath. I felt her weight lean into me, for the first time, not from weakness but from release. "It's quiet," she said. "Yes," I replied. We opened the windows. Together, the heavy curtains shifted. Cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and leaves. The sound of the city filtered through distant traffic, a dog barking life continuing without asking permission. The house breathed. Over the next days, we worked slowly, not with urgency, with intention. We burned the furniture from Samuel's bedroom first. The bed, the chairs, the heavy drapes that never quite let the light in. We dragged them into the yard and watched the fire take hold. The flames climbed, patiently consuming velvet and polish and the invisible residue of entitlement. Rose stood beside me, wrapped in a coat, her face lit by the glow. She didn't cry. Neither did I. Some things don't deserve tears. Inside, we cleaned, not obsessively. Ritually. We opened every door, every drawer, every forgotten corner. We let sunlight touch places it hadn't reached in years. Dust rose and settled. Silence moved freely again. At night, Rose slept in a proper bed. The first night, she woke several times disoriented, apologizing for nothing. The second night, she slept longer. The third, she slept through until morning. Each day, she remembered more. Small things at first, the taste of tea, the sound of the stairs, then larger ones. Our father's voice, the name of the street we grew up on. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It never does. One afternoon, weeks later, we sat in the East Wing. It had been closed for years. Empty rooms. Tall windows. A quietness that felt unused, not abandoned. Rose stood near the window, watching the light move across the floor. What if she said softly, "We turned this into a home"? I waited. "For women like me," she added. The words settled between us. I thought of the faces I'd seen at the gala, of the laughter that had come too easily, of the way discomfort had passed for decency. I thought of how easily people are erased when they stop being convenient. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "We could." She turned to me, then hope flickering carefully across her face, not naive, not demanding, just present. "A place," she said, "where no one sleeps on a floor, where tea isn't something you fear. A place where no one needs permission to exist," I added. She smiled. That evening, I stood alone at the front door. The old doormat lay rolled up nearby, stained, flattened, useless. I picked it up and carried it outside. When I dropped it into the bin, the sound was dull, unceremonious. No symbolism, just removal. A few days later, a new mat arrived. Thick, solid, unapologetic. I placed it carefully in front of the door. Rose watched from behind me, amused. "Do you think it's too much?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said, "it's exactly enough." We stood there for a moment, looking at it, then at each other, and we laughed. Not bitter laughter, not triumphant laughter. The kind that comes when something inside finally loosens. That night, as I lay awake, not from fear but habit, I thought about what adulthood teaches you if you're willing to learn it honestly. Evil rarely arrives screaming. It smiles, it inherits, it waits. It tells you it's being practical. It tells you it knows better. It tells you this is simply how things are now. And if you let it, it will slowly rearrange the world until you no longer recognize yourself inside it. The house is quiet now, not empty, alive. Sometimes I hear Rose humming in the kitchen. Sometimes I hear footsteps in the hallway and feel no need to brace myself. The windows stay open more often than not. And when people ask what happened here, what went wrong, how things fell apart, I don't offer explanations. I simply say, we remembered who this house belongs to, and that, finally, is the truth. There is a moment in every life when the story you believed about yourself quietly collapses, not with noise, not with drama, but with recognition. You realize that love, when left unattended, does not always wait. That absence is not neutral. That time does not preserve what we refuse to look at. What happened in that house was not extraordinary. That is the most unsettling truth of all. Evil did not arrive screaming. It did not break down doors or announce itself as cruelty. It smiled. It organized paperwork. It spoke gently about care, responsibility, and what's best. It wore the face of family, and that is why it survives so easily. Because grown people, intelligent people, prefer comfort to confrontation. Because silence is often rewarded while truth is inconvenient. Because many of us are taught that endurance is virtue, even when endurance becomes surrender. But here is what adulthood eventually teaches, if you are willing to learn it honestly. Love without boundaries becomes permission. Forgiveness without accountability becomes erasure. And kindness, when stripped of clarity, becomes a tool for those who know how to exploit it. Strength is not loud. It does not announce itself in advance. Strength is the quiet decision to stay awake when it would be easier to sleep, to observe instead of react, to wait until truth has weight. And when it finally speaks, it does not shout, it states. What changed the outcome of this story was not anger, it was attention, not vengeance, but memory, not power seized, but power reclaimed. Because the most dangerous lies are not the ones told by strangers. They are the ones told by people who assume you will always love them enough to doubt yourself. If this story unsettled you, that is not an accident. It was never meant to comfort. It was meant to remind. To remind you that dignity is not something granted by others. It is something you defend quietly, consistently, even when no one is watching. And if you are listening to this from somewhere far away, another city, another country, another quiet room, know this. These stories are not about one house, one family, or one betrayal. They are about what happens when we stop paying attention, and about what becomes possible when we finally do. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening slowly the way these stories ask to be heard. Wherever you are watching from and whatever time it is there, you are welcome here. And if this story stayed with you longer than you expected, then it has already done its work.